Welcome to Designing the Best You, a podcast hosted by board-certified holistic health practitioner, functional nutritionist, and autoimmune and trauma survivor, Vanessa McConkey. Vanessa focuses on holistic health, educating and empowering people to take charge of their own fatigue and pain during those in-between moments of life, while confidently owning their own health journey. It's so easy to feel like you're the only one struggling, and boy, does Vanessa know. As a wife and mom of 3 young boys whose body acted as if she had multiple autoimmune diseases because of the childhood trauma she endured, she knows exactly what it's like to lose yourself and your life. She is here to share how she learned to cope with the many changes disease brings and the things your doctor doesn't know or even tell you. This week's episode is one of many where we bring on guests who share their stories of overcoming trauma, managing their chronic conditions naturally, as well as tips from top practitioners and experts in the field of holistic health. Get ready to be blown away and start designing the best you. All right, guys, welcome back to Designing the Best You. Today is a very special episode. We have a gentleman on, and he is a board-certified naturopathic endocrinologist who focuses on thyroid care. So many of you out there are always asking about thyroid issues. This is the episode you're going to want to listen to. He is a New York Times bestselling author multiple times, whose recent titles include the Hormone Healing Cookbook and a Metabolism Reset Diet. And I never say that word right, so forgive me, y'all. We're human. But Dr. Christianson, this is who we have on. He has been featured on countless media appearances, including Dr. Oz, The Doctors, and The Today Show. He is the founding president behind the Endocrine Association of Naturopathic Physicians and American College of Thyroid. Oh my goodness, just speaking today, thyroidology. Welcome, Dr. Christianson. Hopefully you're speaking a lot better than I am today. My goodness.
Those are some really, really tough words.
Right? I mean, I've got like little kids. I'm all about the little words.
Right. Those are some bad ones.
Exactly. So welcome on, and thank you for being on here. It's such an honor to have you here. So tell us, we want to hear all about all the things, but we have limited time. But tell us about your story. I'm always big on the stories of why you got into this.
Yeah, thank you for that. And thank you for doing this and educating people. This is what it's all about. And that's kind of why I'm here and why I do what I do. I was a unhealthy kid, and books changed my life, and I realized health was important. That's the super short version. I had seizures, likely cerebral palsy and complications from that, but I was epileptic, and I was super, super clumsy and put on a lot of weight as an adolescent. I was a really nerdy kid. I was way into science books and space books and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, around adolescence, when I was really heavy, the social world was becoming relevant. And yeah, nerds didn't have their own place, and fat shaming didn't have a label. It was just normal, because there weren't that many big kids. So I was really miserable, and I was really hating life and not at all fitting in socially. Things weren't working out. And I realized that my weight and my health were a barrier. I went to a new section of the library and started grabbing health books and, just dove through those and said, yeah, this has got to be the ticket. And false starts, but eventually some things started to connect. I persisted and became more fit, lost some weight, became somewhat athletic, and it just changed my life. And it made a big impression. I was a kid, and I realized that if this helped me this much, there's got to be a lot of people out there who are struggling, and they could have a big radical positive change by just being connected with the right information. So that kind of became the whole journey.
And I think that's great that you took it upon yourself to learn and learn and learn, and coming from a fellow nerd and research person right here too. I mean, it really makes a big impact on your own personal health when you can take ownership of it and not let someone else drive it, and not, you get to a breaking point, and yours was that breaking point. And I applaud you for taking that ownership and diving in. Now, why the field of endocrinology? It could have been anything, right? Why endocrinology? What happened there?
Yeah. So along the way, I realized that the things that made a big difference for me were, diet and exercise, lifestyle type stuff, and they were huge. And the more I progressed in medical training, I realized that these things were not always a big part of it. But I did see that hormones were really the connection between lifestyle and disease. That our body regulates itself via all these various hormones. We'll talk about them. But when that doesn't work right, it all breaks down. And so we have the means to control that to a huge extent by our lifestyle. So I really saw hormones as this interface between what we do and how we feel. And I realized that there were people to where once it was off badly enough, that lifestyle wasn't always enough by itself, or it had to be more targeted in specific ways. So I saw that as just one more layer to it. So yeah, endocrinology, hormonal disease, and thyroid disease specifically became my big focuses.
And what have you seen in the field of, we'll go down the thyroid path since that's what you're really known for. What have you seen be some of like the common symptoms? And what have you, we're not here to diagnose anyone. We're not here to give, full out medical advice or anything like that. But what have you seen have been the common symptoms that people come to you for, that they struggle with the most, that, breaks your heart the most? And how have you guided people along that path of healing their thyroid?
Yeah, common symptoms, there's many. I've realized over the years that the top one by far has always been body weight. That's been the biggest thing. And just my personal journey, I've really resonated with that. I was able to change my diet, exercise, and that eventually helped it turn around. Many people try those things and they don't work. They do what should work on paper, but they cannot lose weight, or they only do if they're pretty much starving themselves, or if they do, it comes right back again. So yeah, and I've realized too that apart from it being a direct complaint, it's also a contributor to so many other symptoms. It's one of the biggest sources of inflammation throughout the whole body. So that's been really the central focus of all of it.
Yeah, let's talk about the inflammation, because people automatically like, oh, they gain the weight. Like, okay, what can it be? It's my diet, or I'm not working out enough. And, talk about the inflammation, because I know I have a lot of clients that come to me that they're like, oh, the brain fog. Oh, the fatigue, the gut issues and things like that. So when you talk about the inflammation throughout the whole body, right? It's head to toe. And how do we start identifying where it's at, and can you target those specific areas or not?
Well, yeah, so it'll manifest in a lot of areas, but it can come from one core problem. And the biggest known driver in terms of how common this is and what degree of an inflammatory load it raises is toxic fat, fat in the wrong places. So this is a larger driver for people than infections or most anything else you could name. Small case in point, we've known forever that people who are heavier are more apt to have knee problems, joint problems. And for a long time, we thought that, oh yeah, they're just carrying extra weight. There's more load on their skeleton. But studies have now shown that it has nothing to do with that you can actually separate the skeletal load out of the equation, and it's purely the chemical change. So when the body has too much stuck fuel, when there's like fat that it can't tap into, that seeps out chemicals that cause inflammatory reactions. And those cause numerous harmful effects. They can affect energy levels, the brain fog you mentioned, chronic pain, digestive issues, immune response. So all these things can be driven by that, and it can manifest in many different areas in the body.
And you're right. I mean, I speak as a thyroid patient here myself with Hashimoto's and hypothyroidism and whatnot too. I mean, it's all over the place. You're like, oh, I think I have gut issues. Oh, I think brain fog. I'm going to start to target that. And that's what we see so many people do, is we target just one area. And like you said, it stems from one specific area, it being your hormones, right? And so talk about the hormones. We say thyroid. What are hormones? What do hormones mean? People think of, typically, at least from my experience, people have come to me and said, oh, well, it's, my estrogen levels and my testosterone and things like that. Well, what are other hormones out there, and how do they all work together to cause these issues?
It's funny. This is a case to where the word is used differently. Medical people, we mean a lot of things that come under the heading of hormones. Normal people, you're right, they mostly mean estrogen or maybe testosterone when they talk about hormones. But yeah, hormones are chemical messengers. They're made in one place. They control things somewhere else. That's as complex as it gets. There's a whole lot of ones we make in the brain, the thyroid, the various glands, like above the waist, below the waist. They're long chains of proteins, or they're things made out of cholesterol, but they're chemicals that control how the body works. How well we burn fuel, how well we control our immune systems. When we sleep, when we wake, they govern all this and then some.
And you're right, they all do, and they all work together. And it's always interesting because people will say, oh, well, I have, gut issues. I'm going to go to a gastroenterologist. I have, they start going to all the specialists, and you've learned in the naturopathy world and even in the endocrine world that yes, there's a reason. We should be going to some of those specialists when we have major issues and whatnot. But really, all that stuff works together. It's all together. And so what roles have you found that different things play? We know we talked about diet and things like that. And what about genes? What about stress? What about those type of things? How can people, how do they want to start identifying some of those things? Do they need to come to one of us and say, hey, we need to have labs run? Or, are there things that people can think about on their own, right? Just like you and I did, start empowering ourselves to take control. What are some things that people might be able to start identifying themselves before they start diving into tests and different diets and all these different things that we guess on, right?
Yeah. Lots of ways to go with that for sure. Genes are certainly relevant to what our personal weak links are, how things tend to go wrong, but more so that they're not so much really things we can control. They're not really causative factors. And I think there's actually a lot of confusion about how much we need to base our lifestyle decisions on genetics. There's tons of ways you can map yourself out and measure your genome. And we do know some diseases that are highly heritable that do correlate with genetics. And we know tons of ways in which subtle other health factors can be related. But by and large, things that are healthy for one set of genetics are healthy for another set of genetics. There's no humans that need to consume arsenic to thrive. We're a lot more similar than we are different. We need oxygen, we need sunlight, we need green foods. There's pretty basic stuff. And as far as the ways to start out, you mentioned one of the other two big levers. So we've got chronic disease and chronic symptoms. That's what we're talking about here. There's infectious disease, also called communicable. And then there's, accidents, there's trauma, there's things like that. So we put that aside, and everything else, this is, our quality of life, our long-term risk for heart disease, for cancers, diabetes, all that. So those things are governed by the weight more than anything. And the other single factor you mentioned is the stress load. We can talk about that in different terms or ways to define that. But these are things we can control. We can influence how our body is storing fat, the quantity and location, and we can influence our level of resilience and our stress response. And together, they have a huge effect upon just all ways of quality of life.
They do. And when you and I were emailing a little bit, and I was like, oh my goodness, I'm gaining all this weight. What in the world's happening? Whatnot. And I actually linked it back to, and this is something that I've talked about multiple times and I've had other people talk about too. And you don't think about it when you're in the weight gain moment. You're like, oh, this really stinks. What can I do to solve it? And for me, it was stress. I was going through a lot of very, very difficult things that prior week. And all of a sudden, boom, that inflammation, that stress and whatnot. And people don't realize how much just some of the everyday stressors, and they build up. And it's not just, from my practice, what I do is a lot of the hidden stressors, right? We have some of those hidden ones, but just some of the everyday stressors. It's summertime right now that we're recording, and you've got kids at home, and you've got, maybe you still have people working from home. You've got family issues. You've got eating different foods and things like that too. So you've got all these different stressors that are on your body. And those are things that we don't always think about. We also go to food, as I'm sure that you experience too. You go to food as a way to relieve stress when it actually can be putting more stress on your body and adding more weight to all that stuff as well. And, you focus a lot on that weight gain. Tell us more about the weight issue in regards to the different hormones and whatnot, and what you guide patients on.
Yeah, for sure. So managing body weight, there are times in which they have reasons that make that harder for them. And thyroid hormones are one of the biggest ones. So we have the amount of energy that we burn just resting. And that's the largest amount that we expend throughout the day by far. And if thyroid function is not ideal, that can be cut in half. You could burn half of what you would otherwise. And the drawback is that if someone actually wants to lose weight, they've got to have a deficit. They've got a big gap between how much they need and how much they get. They've got to be running out of market debt to actually lose some weight. They've got to be below their body's needs. And if your basal output, if your body's burning so little energy that you've got to go even lower to lose weight, you're malnourished. You can't sustain your muscle mass. You can't stay healthy. So if someone has abnormal thyroid function or thyroid autoimmunity, it's almost impossible for them to safely lose weight in a way that'll be healthy.
Yeah, and that totally makes sense. And so how do you start identifying some of those autoimmunity, those thyroid issues, so that people can healthily lose the weight that they need to, so that they can function, they can just feel like they're a decent member of society most days?
Yeah, so great question. So two facets to that. There's thyroid function and thyroid autoimmunity. So thyroid function, that's what most people get screened if they are even tested for thyroid health. They may not be tested. That's a big problem too. More than half are not diagnosed. So if someone is screened, the tests do pick up on the most severe versions of thyroid dysfunction, like severe hypo or severe hyper. So those do show up. People can have earlier stages, not always as apparent. But the other part of that is the autoimmunity. And this is a big one because this is more common. Probably about a quarter of people have some level of thyroid autoimmunity. Not always enough to be relevant, but some. And only about a tenth of people have marked changes in thyroid function. So way more have the autoimmunity. And even if there's perfectly normal function, if the thyroid is making plenty of hormone, the autoimmune side, that by itself can cause these weight issues. And in often cases, this is never looked at. So if someone does have unresolved weight symptoms, it's important to screen for thyroid autoimmunity. And that's at least starting out with some basic blood tests for thyroid antibodies.
And are a lot of the general practitioners out there aware of those tests?
Well, they're aware of the test, but not aware of the role of screening. So they know that with bad hypothyroidism, that thyroid autoimmunity can cause that. But what people often don't know and what doctors often don't know is that, even when the thyroid's working perfectly, when it's working totally fine, those that have bad autoimmunity have problems. They gain weight, they lose hair, they feel more anxious, they're infertile. They have higher risks of kids getting autism when moms have this. They have more heart disease. They have greater risk for certain cancers. And that's all when the thyroid's working fine. So
that's
even
crazy.
before there's any thyroid, even before there's any thyroid problems, the autoimmunity can cause a lot of issues.
Is there a point that you see, right? We know, you and I both know, right? Women are experiencing these type of issues more than men. Not saying men don't, they do, but a lot more women. Is there a point that you see that, women are, I guess, I don't want to say getting it because it's not like something you can really catch, but this autoimmunity and the thyroid conditions are really showing up? Is it, I've heard different things. It's after they give birth, after they've had maybe someone die in their family and there's a lot of trauma or whatever it may be, or they've been eaten a certain way, or they have a genetic factor. Is there something that you tend to see a little bit more?
Sure. As far as big risk factors or time of onset, you mentioned genetic factors. So yes, the direct family history raises the risk. Kind of odd, but if a woman, and you mentioned this, how males have less of it. So it's like somewhere between 6 to 10 times more common in females. A quick note, if you're a woman and your father has thyroid disease, that makes you just about destined to develop it. So the genes that correlate with this are X-linked chromosomes. Women have 2 sets of those, men have 1. So and generally it's the more recessive of the 2 that carries thyroid disease. So when a man has a daughter, he gave his one and only X chromosome, and she's got 2, one from mom and one from dad. If mom had thyroid disease, she could have given a good chromosome or a bad one, but dad only had 1 to give. So if dad has it, the daughter's rates are extremely high. So that's
don't
one.
Don't hate your dads, but
what's that?
I said, don't hate your dads, but
no, just something to be aware of, right? Just predictive. And then the other big thing you talked about was certain stages of hormonal transition. So after pregnancy, into perimenopause, after menopause. These are all times in which it's much more common to show up then. So if someone's already prone to it, but that's a time which is more apt to start up then rather than at another time.
No, I think that's great too, because then if like you said, your father has it, and then you're more likely to get tested prior to giving birth, or getting pregnant and whatnot, and then you can start heading it off, right? You can start heading off versus when you get to a point where like, oh crap, right?
Yeah. And in terms of genetics, just to close that out a bit, if dad has it, it's just about destiny. If mom has it, you're more at risk. A huge percent of people don't have a family history. So don't think it's got to be something else if there's no one in the family that has it. If dad has it, then it's really likely.
Yeah. No, I hear you there. So you've had a handful of books that have come out, and you've had ones on adrenal resets, you've had thyroid reset, you've had this metabolism. Why can't I say that word today? I want to say metabolic, but you know what I mean? Reset. You have your Hormone Healing Cookbook. Like, why adrenals? We know thyroid. Like, why the metabolic? I'm going to stumble over that word so many times today.
Metabolism reset.
Metabolism. There we go. Thank you. But why? Why did you go to those two outside of thyroid? Do those have something? I mean, we talked about. Here, I can't even say it again. Metabolic and how it relates to thyroid and whatnot. But like, why adrenals?
Sure. So a quick overarching about the storyline. Prior to the ones you mentioned, I had two other books on thyroid disease. There was The Complete Idiot's Guide to Thyroid Disease and Healing Hashimoto's. So those kicked it all off. And yeah, they were very straightforward about all facets of thyroid disease and some overviews of them, of natural and conventional approaches, and then about specifically for Hashimoto's. The adrenal reset was in response to the growing rate of adrenal issues that was taking place in the 2012 to 2014 era. There was showing up to be a high rate of HPA dysfunction, like heightened stress response amongst people. And that was a marked problem correlating with some chronic issues and higher rates of chronic disease. That one I showed that some very simple things could radically improve your body's stress resilience. We can't change everything that goes into our stress load. Change what you can for sure. But if you do a few things regularly, like get sunlight in the morning, have some good carbs at night, those two little things go a long ways towards fixing the body's rhythm, getting that back in alignment again. So that was the focus of the adrenal reset. The metabolism reset was really for those who try everything and cannot lose weight. The weight just does not budge. That was the answer to that. In many cases, there's a lot of ways people can lose scale weight, but I really wanted to help people lose their waist and keep it off. So really have a change in body composition that was lasting. That's what the metabolism reset was all about. And in that, I explained how, you can't just lower your food intake. You've got to really still feed your muscles, and you've got to do it for a short period of time. So it's got to be a powerful, precise thing. And I also encouraged, many were trying the approach like on shows like The Biggest Loser, where they're trying to cut their food and exercise more. You can't do both. If you do that, your stress response heightens, your body slows its metabolism further, and you may lose scale weight short term, but you're almost guaranteed to rebound and be heavier than you were before you started a few months down the road. So this is really a safe way to lower waste, lower the most toxic types of body fat, and keep that off longer term. And then thyroid reset was motivated by a big number of new studies showing that thyroid disease is really reversible by diet. Like 60 to 80% of the time, people can fully reverse the disease by some basic, simple steps. So that's kind of the through line of all those books.
No, and that's great, because a lot of people are like, why do people go these different routes, and what do they do, and all those things, because people, we all know when you're on a podcast or something, they're going to research you, they're going to find you, they're going to figure it out, right? But like in terms of, as we're starting to get towards the end of our time here, in terms of, you talked about in your thyroid reset book that diet can reverse it. We hear about things going to remission and reversing it. Like, is there ever a reason why it can't get reversed? And, we don't want to get people all hyped up on something and then they can't, or is it, and this is a lifestyle thing that they have to do for the rest of their life? Talk a little bit about that.
It's an odd thing. It's not intuitive, but it's very simple. So in the modern world, the biggest controllable factor related to thyroid disease is iodine intake. We need some, the thyroid needs some. Those who are prone to thyroid disease, their genes don't process extra iodine as well as other people's do. So a little bit extra actually stops their thyroid. If the thyroid gets too much, it's a huge source of just inflammation and an immune response. So when faced with too much, the body shuts the thyroid down. So yeah, many people genetically, they shut off their thyroid in response to a little bit too much iodine, and not even crazy amounts. So we've known that for a while, but the new angle was that if they deliberately go below a range, they can reverse that. One analogy that makes a lot of sense to me here is the whole thing like the one straw that broke the camel's back, right? So it wasn't that the straw was bad. It wasn't that the camel couldn't carry straw, but also if you think about that, if you just broke the camel's back, you can't take that one straw off and call it good. You've got to really unload completely and let the back heal. Then you can carry straw again. So that's all it is for iodine in the thyroid. It's not just taking the last straw off. You got to unload it and let it heal up properly. Then you can tolerate normal amounts again.
And that's good to know too. And can you ever go too low on the iodine that it affects your thyroid or other parts of your body? Or is it like a fine line?
There's can you, and how likely is it to happen? That's like saying, is it ever a good idea to spend your last paycheck on the lottery? Well, yeah, your odds are 1 in a billion that it might help you. It's not likely. So as far as iodine deficiency, getting too low in that, it's possible. We've actually had 6 documented cases in the last 40 years. So
wow.
it can happen, but it's not an easy thing. And those cases were people that by and large didn't have most of their intestinal tract, most of it was surgically removed, and their diets were comprised almost exclusively of just 1 or 2 types of raw vegetables. So yeah, it's possible, but it's not something you're going to stumble into.
And that is really good to know, because you hear so many conflicting things, right? Go back to the library days, y'all. I'm tired of the internet sometimes, but like there's so many different things out there, right? That say, oh yeah, too much iodine. Oh, why, have this diet and that diet. And it's like, this is proven like 6 cases, guys, 6 cases of too little. So reducing your intake is huge. I know it's personally helped me,
Yeah, 6 cases of too little. The American Thyroid Association just mapped out the intake for the US, and the average intake is okay, but there's subpopulations that are between 30 to 40% based on age and gender that are getting amounts that are unsafe. So yeah, the overall average is okay, but about 1/3 to 40% of people are getting more than is safe for those with thyroid disease. So yeah, that's a lot, and that's common. And even if you avoid the obvious sources, you're not getting none, because all foods have a fair amount.
And what are the obvious sources?
The biggest ones are going to be iodized salt, dairy products, commercial dairy products, processed grain products, some types of seafood, egg yolks, and then we'll see this also in sea vegetables. Those are ones that not many people eat that much of, but they've got a ton in there.
So no more sushi. Seaweed, all that wrapped.
So the camel's back thing again.
Yeah.
If you unload it, you can tolerate some sources. And sushi uses nori, which is also called laver. That's among the lower of sea vegetables. Some on occasion is harmless for most people. But yeah, if someone's wishing to reverse their thyroid disease, that's the kind of thing to make a priority.
And like I said, it's huge, guys, making that just those little subtle changes in the diets, and you start to feel better. The things like the brain fog lift, the things like the joint pain, all those things that people come to us with. It's amazing. I mean, and I can personally speak from experience too. And so as we're coming to a close here, if you can leave the audience with one tidbit that like, this is what I got from this episode, what would that be?
Your body can fix itself. There's people that like don't have a thyroid, and of course that's different, but pretty much all cases, your body can fix itself. It's more resilient than we've thought. I've been practicing now for 27 years, and each year I get more excited about the potential for the body to recover and repair itself. So just know that things can work. And if something is not working for you, it doesn't mean that nothing could. It means that you just got to modify things. You got to try a different approach for it.
I like that. It's like when you're sailing a ship, you just got to adjust the sail a little bit, just move it along. That's all you got. It's never going to be, just never not going to be able to adjust it or not have to adjust it. So where can people find you? Where can they get a hold of you, your books, things like that?
The books, anywhere you buy books, you can find my books. If your thyroid's a concern, grab the Thyroid Reset Diet. I show how most cases can reverse, and I don't say that lightly. As far as other information, any topics on thyroid, adrenals, or hormones, just Google Alan Christianson and, why is T3 low? Or Alan Christianson and, how can I lose weight if I got thyroid disease? Whatever it is, I've got thousands of blogs and videos that are out there for free, so you can find most anything you'd want to know about.
That's great. Well, I want to thank you so much for being on. This has been such a pleasure to have you here. And the audience is going to get so many different tidbits out of the stuff that you shared here. And again, like he said, if you guys are looking for the resources, we'll have it, you can Google him and they'll be in the show notes. So you guys can easily click on that as well. And if this is an episode that resonates with you, or someone who's struggling with thyroid issues, please go ahead and share it, because the more you can share information about things that are meaningful to people, you can save one life. That's, type thing, help someone else live a better life. And you guys, thank you again for joining us on Designing the Best You. Thank you again, Dr. Christianson.
Well, thanks for having me here, Jess. I really appreciate it.
Oh my goodness, what another amazing episode. Well, thank you so much for joining us this week on Designing the Best You. Make sure to visit our websites listed in the show notes, where you can subscribe in iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, any other feed, so you'll never miss a show. And hey, while you're at it, if you found value in the show, we would appreciate a rating on iTunes. Go ahead, screenshot this episode, tag us, and share on your favorite social media platform so others can find us too and get the help that they need. If you want to learn more, make sure you check out the show notes, where you can find links to our pages, as well as the opportunity to sign up for a free call with Vanessa. We cannot wait to see you on the inside. And remember, keep on designing the best you from the inside out.